What's up, YouTube? Today we are going into Daniel chapter 1. I am so excited to learn about Daniel. I have heard about Daniel in the lion's den. I done heard about Daniel fasting, but I really don't know too much about Daniel, his origin. What about Daniel? Where did he come from? And how did he become? How did we end up at the Daniel fast and all that good stuff? So pretty much I'm going to dive into Daniel, and I just want to give like a little bit of backdrop from what I see in my Bible. So it says the book of Daniel bears the name of its author. So we know Daniel wrote the book. Daniel was a teenager when he was taken to Babylon about 605 BC. He and his 3 friends were of noble or royal Judean lineage. He served in the Babylonian administration during the successive reigns of several Babylonian and Medo-Persian kings. So when was Daniel written? It says, although many modern critical scholars contest Danielic authorship and posit a 2nd century BC author, the traditional view asserts that the book was composed in the 6th century BC at the time of the events described over the course of the prophet Daniel's long life. Both manuscript and linguistic evidence supports the 6th century dating. What's really important, where did it happen? The context of the book take place in Babylon during the Babylonian exile, which began under King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel opens with a description of the events when he and his friends were taken to Babylon, and ends in the reign of Cyrus of Persia, which would have been the 3rd year of his reign, which it says was 536 BC. My bad, y'all. All right, let's get into it. So the title says the capture of Jerusalem and the deportation of youth to Babylon. This is an introduction to the young men and setting. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with some of the vessels from the house of God. Nebuchadnezzar carried them to the land of Babylon, to the house of his God, and put the vessels in the treasury of his God. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, good looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. The king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to attend to the king. Among them from the Judahites were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And that tells me that those are going to be our 4 main characters for this chapter. The chief eunuch gave them names. He gave them the name Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. So I'm going to stop right there. All right, so the first person we hear about is King Jehoiakim, right? He was in his 3rd year of reign as king. But then it says King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and laid siege over it. So it says the Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him. So you got King Jehoiakim, who is king over Judah, and you got King Nebuchadnezzar, who is king over Babylon. And it says the Lord handed King Jehoiakim of Judah over to him, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. So now Nebuchadnezzar carried those vessels to the land of Babylon, to his house of God, right? And he put the vessels in the treasury of his God. So here we go. That same king ordered Ashpenaz, who is his chief eunuch, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility. Now, he was very specific about what he wanted. He wanted young men without any physical defects. They have to look good. They got to have wisdom. You know what I'm saying? They got to be 10-star men. You feel me? So they had to have perception. They had to be capable of serving in the king's palace. You know what I'm saying? They had standards to meet, right? So the other thing is they were supposed to be able to learn Chaldean language and literature, right? So the king assigned them daily provisions. So they got food, they got wine, and the requirements were that they were supposed to be trained for 3 years. And at the end of their 3-year training, then they were supposed to start serving the king. Now, among those people who were taken from the land of Judah, the Israelites, they were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, it says the chief eunuch gave them names. He gave the name Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. So it was like new land, new name. You know what I'm saying? So they went to a new land, and now they have a new identity. You're not Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now we got Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we always hear about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So I'm really excited to hear about how this all ties into the story. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start at verse 8. And the subtitle for this section says, Courage of the Young Man in Difficult Circumstances. So what we know about them so far is they were pulled because they were pretty much best of the best, okay? Wherever they were from, they were best of the best. They fit all the descriptions. They had wisdom, good looking. You know, they were able and capable to do what the king needed them to do, right? And verse 8 says, Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned your food and drink. What if he sees your face looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So Daniel said to the guard whom the chief eunuch had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine your appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. He agreed with them and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating of the king's food. Daniel fast. This is where it comes from, guys. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So let's just pause right there really quick. Daniel said that he didn't want to defile himself with the king's food or with the wine. So my man's was not on that. He wasn't having it. He didn't want none of what the king had, and he darn sure didn't want his wine. It said God granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch, which means the chief eunuch was like, all right, bet, I got you. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to let you do my thing. But he said to Daniel, what if the king finds out that you look a little bit skinnier than everybody else? Because you're not eating the king's food and you're not drinking the king's wine. So what if you start looking a little bit different? So Daniel had a proposition. So no cap. Daniel was like, yo, just give me 10 days. Examine me after the 10 days is over, and you could deal with me as you see fit. Okay? So the king's eunuch agreed to that. All right? So it says after the end of the 10 days, they look better and healthier than all the other young men who were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine, and they were able to drink and gave them, So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. All right. So we need to get into the last couple verses of this chapter. And it says the excellence of God's chosen men. So God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind. I can't even be transparent with y'all right now and tell you some of the dreams I have, but they don't be making no sense. I wish I knew what they meant, but God gave him the understanding to understand vision and dreams of every kind. All right, verse 18 says, at the end of the time that the king has said to present them, the chief eunuch presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to attend to the king. Now, y'all might be wondering, what do you mean at the end of the time? Remember, they had a 3-year requirement where they had to learn the Chaldean language and literature and get training so that they could serve the king. And when it came to it, remember, they're the only ones who didn't have the king's food and wine. They chose to eat vegetables, and they chose those 4 out of everybody. Okay, all right. So they began to attend to the king. So verse 20 says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them about, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and mediums in his entire kingdom. And for me right now, I'm going to be honest, y'all, that sounds like ChatGPT. Because I find ChatGPT 10 times smarter than Google, and it helps me with everything I need help with, okay? All right, I just wanted to put that out there. It says Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. And that is the end of the first chapter. So, we got King Nebuchadnezzar. All we know is he basically laid siege over King Jehoiakim of Judah. He recruited some young men that he had certain standards that he wanted. Long story short, Daniel and his 3 friends got recruited, and they decided to not have the king's food or the king's wine. And they were shown to be the best of the best, like top tier, once everything was over and it was time for them to be presented to the king. And it sounds like they were in really good standing. So what I get from this chapter is maybe the other young gentlemen, I don't know who they were, maybe they wanted to fit in, so they ate the king's food and drank his wine. But Daniel and his friends were not willing to compromise to fit in. And that's what I like about Daniel so far. He said, nah, I ain't going to defile myself with the king's food and his drink. Give me veggies or whatever. Let me do my thing. He didn't need or feel the need to fit in. And that's what I like about Daniel. Some of us have to realize that we're not going to fit in with the world. We don't have to compromise with the world to fit in. Once we choose that we're living our life a certain way, that we're going to serve God, that we're going to be on this path, there's no need to compromise with any